Good evening all. Welcome to Narayana Educational Institutions. Today we are going to be having a discussion of September 5th morning session chemistry paper of JEE Mains. Alright. Now a quick disclaimer before we start off. These questions are based on students' memories. There will be errors in the questions. There will also be small error in the key and in the phrasing of the question. Please take the questions with a grain of salt and use the questions to basically understand where the questions are coming from, what model of questions are generally being asked in the JEE Mains examination. Now we'll start off without any further ado. Okay, the first question, what is the denticity of EDTA minus 4? EDTA minus 4 is going to be a hexadentate ligand. Now let me talk about the structure of EDTA. EDTA is basically going to be ethylene diamine tetraacetic acid. Ethylene diamine na we end up having carbon, single bond carbon, single bond and single bond N. This is going to be ethylene diamine specifically speaking. Now it's going to be having tetraacetic acid. The tetraacetic acid is going to be attached to the two nitrogens over here. So this is basically the structure of EDTA minus 4, where you're going to be having the nitrogen acting as a ligand. This is one liganding center, one more liganding center, O minus, O minus, O minus and O minus. So these are the 6 liganding centers over here which are going to be having lone pairs which will be donating to form a coordinate covalent bond. So the denticity of this guy is going to be 6. So this is basically going to be the denticity of EDTA minus 4. Let's get to the next one. How many isomers are possible for this particular given complex? So we are going to be having PTEN twice, NO twice. I think there's a small error here. I think it's supposed to be NO2 twice in this particular case here. Alright, because I remember seeing the question paper, it was supposed to have been NO2 twice. So this is probably going to be a tiny error in the printing over here. So we're going to be taking it as NO2 and discussing with respect to NO2. So it is PTEN twice, NO2 twice over here. So what is going to be the different number of isomers possible? Now in this particular case, let us take it as NO2 and talk about it. The issue here is this NO2 will end up showing linkage isomerism over here. Alright, so when I talk about linkage isomerism, what do I mean by linkage isomerism? The NO2 can form coordinate covalent bond from this oxygen ending, or it can form coordinate covalent bond from the nitrogen ending over here. Depending on which ending is used, we'll end up writing it in a different manner. If I'm going to be having the nitrogen ending donating, then we'll be calling it as NO2. If the oxygen ending donates, we'll be writing it as ONO. Alright. So depending on which ending donates, we'll end up calling it as either NO2 minus or we'll call it as ONO minus. So depending on which ending donates, we'll end up having a different compound actually applicable over there. So let's talk about how many different isomers are possible. So first off, let us take the first case over here. The first case possible is PTEN twice, NO2 twice. Now, for this complex over here, we are going to be having NO2 being taken. That means this nitrogen is going to be donating in both the cases over here. This guy will end up having a structure possible like this. So we end up having the two ethylene diamines right now in a cis conformation over here. Alright, and the NO2 can be applied on the other two locations which are left over empty. So this is basically going to be one of the conformations applicable, the cis conformation. This cis conformation happens to be optically active, meaning I will end up having this structure number 1 and I will also have this guy's mirror image which is going to be 1 dash. So I will have the mirror image of this guy which is going to be structure 1 dash also applicable. So for the cis compound here, we get 2 isomers. Let's talk about the trans fellow here. If I'm looking at the trans compound here, we'll end up having it like this. So this is going to be the trans isomer in this case. This trans isomer is going to be having a nice clean plane of symmetry. So this is my trans isomer, it just got a plane of symmetry applicable here. So this trans isomer is optically inactive. Alright, so there is going to be only one isomer applicable for the trans here. So if I took this guy, we end up having cis having 2 isomers and the trans is going to be having 1. So total is going to be 3. Just like this, we will have linkage possibility now applicable for the NO2 group over here. If I'm applying the linkage possibility here, the second case possible is going to be PTEN twice, NO2 and an ONO. That is, in this case, the NO2 is going to be linked over here, meaning the nitrogen is donating, and there is an ONO, meaning the oxygen is going to be donating in this scenario over here. So this is basically going to be also having 3 isomers possible. How are there 3 possible over here? Same, cis will have 2 isomers applicable, and the trans will have 1 isomer applicable over here. Why are there 2 isomers applicable for cis? Because it is optically active. So we'll have a pair of enantiomers. So we'll have a pair of enantiomers applicable there, and the trans will be having 1 structure only applicable here. Let's go for the third case possible. The third case is going to be, instead of NO2 and ONO, we'll take 2 ONOs over here. So if I'm taking 2 ONO groups over here, it will work out like PTEN twice, ONO twice. This will end up having same scenario. Cis will have 2 isomers, and the trans will end up having 1 isomer. So in this particular case here, we're going to be having 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 and 7, 8, 9. Total number of isomers works out as 9. So there are total 9 isomers applicable, including linkage and stereoisomerism for this particular complex. So this is your second question here for today. Let's get to the next one. For a galvanic cell, M+2 aqueous plus zinc solid gives M solid plus Zn2 plus aqueous. Delta G naught has been given as minus 386 kilojoules per mole. Okay, all right. What is the value of E naught of the cell in volts? Okay, so in this particular case here, we are required to calculate what is the value of delta, what is the E naught of the cell given the delta G naught value. So the relationship is very straightforward. Delta G naught is equal to minus NF into E naught of the cell. So let's dump it over here. But before we get to that, we need to calculate the value of N for this. What's the value of N in this case? Here, look at the equation. We are going to be having M+2 becoming M, and zinc is becoming zinc plus 2. That means here we are having a 2 electron transfer happening in this case here, where we are going to be having the zinc undergoing oxidation and the M+2 undergoes reduction over here. So 2 electron transfer, which effectively means N value is equal to 2 in this case. So we have the N value in this case as 2. So let's substitute over here. We'll have E naught of the cell being equal to delta G naught by minus N into F, which of course works out as minus 386. It is given in the units as kilojoules over here, which means we need to convert it to the SI units of joules over here. So 386 into 1000 divided by N value is 2 into 96,500. Alright, so with a negative sign of course. So the E naught of the cell we can calculate now. So this and this gets cancelled, and we'll have these two gone, these two gone. So we end up having it as 2 into 965 over here, which works out as 1830 over here. So it works out as 1830, which effectively is going to be effectively nothing but 386 divided by 2. So we'll have it as 386 into 10, or rather 3860 divided by 1830. So these two will go perfectly into each other over there. Perfectly, yeah. 9, 18, 18, approximately somewhere around 2. So you guys can calculate this particular value off. So it's going to be some 2 point something over here. In this case over here, when you are given this in an exam scenario, you'll have to be exact about it. So you need to calculate it up to whatever decimal point is required over here. So it works out as 386 divided by 183 in this particular case. 183, yeah, not 183, it works out as 193. So yeah, it works out exactly as 2 volts. So the answer exactly works out as 2 volts in this particular case here. I made a mistake in the calculation here. So it's not 183, it is 1930. So 3860 divided by 1930 works out as 2 volts exactly. So the answer for this particular question works out as 2 volts in this particular case. Let's get to the next one. Okay, which amino acid is not an essential amino acid? Now, essential amino acid, now what does essential amino acid mean? Essential amino acid is not produced in the human body. And this essential amino acid has to be taken from outside. What do I mean by taken in from outside? Basically from food. We take essential amino acids into the human body through food which we consume generally. Now, usually you will find it in protein supplements, milk, eggs, protein supplements, meat, etc. So generally the most common sources are basically going to be meat, milk and eggs. Now anyway, coming back to this. So they are asking you which is not an essential amino acid. Among these here, lysine is essential, valine is essential, threonine is also going to be essential. Now among the T's over here, they have given you tyrosine over here. The other T amino acid, which is going to be tryptophan, is also an essential amino acid. Tyrosine is going to be a non-essential amino acid. So they're asking you which one is not an essential amino acid. Answer is tyrosine in this particular case. So this is basically the answer for this question. Let's get to the next one. Non-essential, now what does it mean? It means it is already produced in the human body naturally. So we don't need to ingest it from outside actually. Let's get to it. Next one. Okay, all right. When atmosphere becomes polluted. Okay, all right. When carbon dioxide value is 0.03% in atmosphere. Okay, I feel like there is a tiny error in the way the question is phrased over here, because the first point is going to be for atmospheric pollution, but the remaining 3 points, these 3 points are going to be with respect to water pollution. These 3 are not meant for atmospheric pollution. So there is probably some issue in the question over there, but the options seem to be reasonably clear. Let's talk about it. So when carbon dioxide value is 0.03%, this is going to be volume percentage generally, all right, in atmosphere. This is the normal percentage of carbon dioxide. So this is perfectly fine. It is not polluted or anything of that sort in this case. This is not polluted. Next, when the BOD value is 5 parts per million. Now, when we talk about clean water, clean water is usually considered to have a BOD value of 5 parts per million or lesser. That is basically going to be your clean water's BOD value. If it's going to be highly polluted water, the BOD value will generally be 17 parts per million usually, or higher, alright, or higher. So in this case, this is not polluted water, this is clean water actually. So this actually stands for clean water in this case. Next, due to presence of eutrophication. What exactly is eutrophication? See, when we are going to be having, say, farmlands next to rivers, what happens is, if the farmlands end up using a large amount of fertilizer, when it rains badly, sometimes the fertilizer gets washed off into river or lake, gets washed into lakes. When this happens, what happens is, this fertilizer will promote the growth of algae. The algae, when it ends up, spreading tremendously in the water body, what happens is it will cover the entire surface of the water body. If it covers the entire surface of the water body, oxygen gas cannot dissolve into the water over there, which will kill any animal life present in that particular lake or pond or whatever water body which we are talking about over there. This generally does not happen in rivers, because river may you will end up having flowing water there, so it will get washed off completely. But in a lake or a pond, this is going to be a very dangerous thing for any animal life or fish life, aquatic life which is present over there. So when it promotes the growth of algae, the algae covers and reduces the oxygen in lake. This leads to death of aquatic life. That is basically what is called as eutrophication. So this process is referred to as eutrophication. This is something which definitely is a cause of polluted water. Alright, so this is definitely polluted water. What is the water polluted with over here? The water is generally polluted with fertilizers. Alright, runoff fertilizers from any farming area which is near that particular lake after a shower is going to be what causes this kind of problem. Last one. If concentration of dissolved oxygen is greater than 6 parts per million, this is going to be the good condition. So this is normal lake water. So if it's more than 6 parts per million, this is going to be good normal lake water. If it is lesser than 6 parts per million, then it is going to be something which can lead to eutrophication. So more than 6 parts per million is good. So in this case here, pollution, if you are talking about pollution being the only thing to look at, then answer has to be option 3 in this case, because first, second and the last option are basically talking about normal conditions, and even if the question is not framed properly, we can effectively understand that the odd man out over here is going to be option 3, because option 1, 2 and 4 are basically talking about non-polluted systems. Option 3 is talking about a polluted case over there. So answer has to be option 3 in this case. Okay. Which of the following is suggested to suppress the effect of noradrenaline? Noradrenaline is going to be one of the chemicals which is used inside the human body in terms of neural transmissions. Now, in some cases where you are going to be having depression, all right, when a person has depression, what happens is you will end up having low concentration of noradrenaline to be present over there. So we'll end up having low concentration of noradrenaline. So this is going to be something which will inhibit the amount of signal activity in the human body in terms of neural activity there, thereby making the person feel depressed. Now this depression, how do we counter this depression? How we counter this depression is very simple. This particular noradrenaline which we are talking about over here is generally broken down by enzymes. Alright, this noradrenaline gets broken down by enzymes in the human body. What do we do in this case to prevent this particular person from being depressed? We make sure the enzyme is stopped. Alright, the antidepressant which we are going to be taking will actually not increase the production of noradrenaline. It will decrease the reactivity of the enzyme which destroys your noradrenaline in your body over there. Noradrenaline generally is going to be something which gets broken down by enzymes in the human body. So what does the antidepressant do? The antidepressant stops the enzyme which destroys the noradrenaline from doing its job. Thereby, I am going to be having only production of noradrenaline happening in the human body. The destruction of it, which maintains the equilibrium, is now being broken. So the destruction is broken now. I will have noradrenaline increasing in the human body. Thereby, the person will feel less depressed and the antidepressant drug works. So the question over here is not framed properly in this case. It is not probably to suppress the effect of noradrenaline. It is supposed to have been suppress the breakdown of noradrenaline. So that is basically the question over here is what I feel. Suppress the breakdown of noradrenaline is supposed to be the question is what I feel in this case. So there's a tiny error. You are supposed to be having it as which suppresses the breakdown of noradrenaline here. Answer is antidepressant drugs. Analgesic has nothing to do with it. Antihistamine nothing to do with it. Anti-inflammatory nothing to do with it. So answer here has to be antidepressant in this particular case. Let's get to the next one. What is the correct order of acidity of alpha hydrogens of the following compounds? Okay, all right, let's have a look at each of the alpha locations here and then talk about their acidity. So this is the alpha location, alpha location, alpha location, and alpha location. Now, how do we check the stability, or how do we check the acidity? The acidity is checked by stability of the conjugate base. Alright, so we will have to check for the stability of the conjugate base in this particular case. So the more stable conjugate base implies more acidic parent acid. So this is the principle we are going to be using over here. So the more stable conjugate base means you're going to be having a more acidic parent acid used in this particular case over here. So let's start talking about each of these guys. So let's have a look now. So the first one will have C minus. It is going to be stabilized by this. So this is for option A. Let's have a look at option B. So in this case here, we will have resonance from this, but we will also be having a cross conjugation like this. This cross conjugation is going to be something which you can think of as competitive resonance. This competitive resonance decreases the stability of this C minus. Next, so this is for Bombay. Next, we are going to be having as option C. So in this case also we have a little bit of competitive resonance, but this competitive resonance is going to be on both sides. They are both competing to make the C minus more stable. So this is going to be favorable competitive resonance. Whereas here it is going to be unfavorable competitive resonance. Right. Here in this case, it's going to be unfavorable competitive resonance. Here it is favorable competitive resonance. So we are going to be having this case definitely being more stable compared to the previous two over here. Let's go for the last one. So in this case also, this is similar to Bombay over here. So this is also going to be having unfavorable competitive resonance in this case. So this is also going to be unfavorable competitive resonance over here, which makes it less stable. So it is also going to be decreasing the stability of the C minus here. So if I'm considering the stability of the carbanion formed over here or the enolate ion formed over here, which one is the most stable? C is the most stable, followed by A, followed by B, followed by D. Why am I considering B better than D? Because nitrogen is less electronegative than the oxygen, meaning the donation capacity of nitrogen is greater than the donation capacity of oxygen, which makes this guy having more unfavorable competitive resonance, and it decreases the stability even more in this particular case here. So this is going to be the stability order for the enolate ion, which means this is also the stability order of acidic character over there, basically speaking. So the stability order of the enolate ion, the parent acid's acidic character is also the same order. So it's C greater than A greater than B greater than D, which is, yep, option 1. Let's see if they have repeated. Maybe we got the option 1 itself. So C greater than, okay, this is wrong. This part is wrong here. This is wrong. This is wrong. Okay, cool. So answer for this question is going to be option number 1 in this particular case here. Let's get to the next one. Okay, correct structure of PCl5 in solid state. PCl5 in solid state exists as PCl4 plus and PCl6 minus 1. PCl4 plus is going to be tetrahedral and PCl6 minus is going to be octahedral. So let's check out which one matches. Wrong, wrong. This part is correct, this part is correct, but this structure is wrong, this structure is correct. Tetrahedral, octahedral. Answer is option 4. So in this particular case, the correct answer is going to be option 4 in this scenario over here. Let's get to the next one. The value of CFSC for complex having 3d6 in high spin situation. Okay, all right. Looks like they are asking for both octahedral and tetrahedral. So we need to talk about both octahedral and tetrahedral split in this particular case. So let's talk about octahedral split over here. So if we are looking at the octahedral split here, how does the octahedral split work? In the octahedral split over here, we'll end up having T2G at the lower level and we'll have EG at the higher level. Okay. Whereas when I'm considering the tetrahedral split over here, in the tetrahedral split, we'll end up having EG at the lower level and the T2G at the higher level. Okay. And the difference over here in terms of energy is going to be called as delta octahedral. This difference is going to be referred to as delta tetrahedral in this particular case here. Okay, so we have delta octahedral, delta tetrahedral applicable. Now let's have a look at each individual one, how each one is going to be stabilized. The T2G electrons are stabilized by a minus 0.4 times delta octahedral value, whereas this is for the T2G, by the way. Whereas the EG gets destabilized by a plus 0.6 times delta octahedral value. Let's go for this particular case here. In this particular case here, we are going to be having EG. It gets stabilized by a minus 0.6 times delta tetrahedral. Whereas we are going to be having T2G over here getting destabilized by a plus 0.4 times delta tetrahedral in this particular case here. So this is going to be for each electron over here. This is per electron. Similarly, this is also going to be per electron case. Now let's talk about number of electrons to be filled up here. It is D6 high spin situation. D6 high spin situation. First electron, second electron, third electron, fourth, fifth, sixth. First, second, third, fourth, fifth, and sixth. So these are your individual configurations. All we have to do now is add up and get the answer. So T2G here has got 4 electrons. 4 electrons now, 4 into minus 0.4, meaning it works out as minus 2.4 delta octahedral. Okay, so we're going to be having 4 into minus 0.4, sorry, not minus 2.4, it's going to be minus 1.6 delta octahedral. So we'll have it as minus 1.6 delta octahedral. So 4 into minus 0.4, okay, and it's going to be 0.6 over here, so it's going to be 2 of them. So plus 1.2 delta octahedral, which effectively works out as minus 0.4 delta octahedral in this particular case. So minus 0.4 delta octahedral, now this is correct, and this is correct. Let's go for the next one, tetrahedral case. In tetrahedral case, we get it as minus 0.6 delta tetrahedral per Eg. We have 3 electrons here and 3 electrons here. So we'll end up having, in this particular case, it will be 3 into minus 0.6, meaning it works out as 1.8 delta tetrahedral minus, and we have 3 of this 0.4, which means it works out as plus 1.2, which means it works out as minus 0.6 delta tetrahedral. So minus 0.4 delta octahedral, minus 0.6 delta tetrahedral. So minus 0.6 delta tetrahedral, this is fine, this is wrong, this is correct, this was wrong over here, this is wrong over here. So we are going to be having, in this case, the only one which matches up fully is option number 1. So answer for this case is going to be option 1 in this particular scenario here. Let's get to the next one. Okay. Which of the for the following reaction at equilibrium, for the following reaction at equilibrium, 2NO2 gas is going to be in equilibrium with 2N2O4, is going to be in equilibrium with N2O4 over here. Delta H is going to be minus 58 kilojoules per mole. So we're going to be having, in this particular case here, following changes are made, then identify in which direction reaction is going to be shifting. So how to proceed over here is like this. You're going to be having 2NO2 gas in equilibrium with N2O4 gas over here. Delta H is given as minus 58 kilojoules per mole. So we are given that it is going to be an exothermic reaction in this particular case over here. So if it is an exothermic reaction in this particular case over here, how to proceed and get it done? Increase in temperature and increase in pressure are the conditions to be taken into account. If I increase temperature over here, what is going to be happening in this case? Increasing temperature will basically end up shifting the reaction in the endothermic direction. This will shift it in endothermic direction. Alright, so this is going to be shifting it in the endothermic direction in this particular case here. Whereas increase in pressure will shift it in the direction where there is going to be lesser number of gaseous moles. Alright, so it's going to be shifting it in the direction of lesser number of gaseous moles over here, whereas this shifts it in the endothermic direction in this particular case over here. So endothermic direction and lesser number of gaseous moles is how this is particular moving over here. So let's start talking about which direction is endothermic here. So forward is going to be exothermic, meaning backward is basically going to be your endothermic direction over here. So backward is endothermic direction. Increase in temperature will not shift it to products, will shift it towards reactants. Reactants, products is wrong. Okay. Next, increase in pressure is going to be shifting it towards lesser number of gaseous moles. Lesser number of gaseous moles now product side over here, which means towards product is correct, towards product is correct, reactants is wrong, reactants is wrong. Meaning in this case, which answer is going to be matching up? We are going to be having option 2 is going to be the correct answer in this particular case over here. So this is basically purely based obviously on Le Chatelier's principle. So this is going to be a question which is purely on Le Chatelier's principle. I hope this question was clear. Let's get to the next one. Above CMC, correct diagram for missile formation is, they are giving you, this is your soap. We are going to be having hydrocarbon part given by this crooked end over here. This is your hydrocarbon part, and we are going to be having this as the CO minus part. Okay, so this is going to be the covalent part, and this is your ionic part. Alright, so covalent and ionic part are going to be these two parts over here. So let's have a look now and talk about what is going to be the CMC here. So in this particular case here, above CMC now, this is going to be your missile formation case. So all they are asking is how does the missile look? What is a missile? A missile is going to be something where you are going to be having a dirt particle over here. So let's say this is going to be the dirt particle over here. So this dirt particle is going to be surrounded by the part which is going to be made up of the covalent part. The dirt is generally going to be something which is going to be an organic impurity, meaning it is going to be covalent in nature. You guys are familiar with like attracts other like particles, at least in chemistry that's how it works for covalent systems. So when you're going to be having this kind of a scenario applicable over here, the dirt particle is attracted to the covalent part of soap. So if it is attracted to the covalent part of soap over here, what is going to be happening in this case is it will be attracted to this particular part of soap, meaning my missile will look like this. And of course, we will have one ionic end on each side over here. So in this case, this is going to be your missile which we are looking for over here. So let's have a look at which one is going to be correct. So we are going to be having this one is fine, no problem. This is wrong because they have put the ionic ending here closer. So this part is going to be wrong. This is obviously crap over here, and this is also not correct over here. So answer here is going to be option 1 in this particular case over here. So this is going to be your micelle formation case here. This is from surface chemistry obviously. Let's get to the next one. The micelle over here is also referred to as an associated colloid. Alright, so the micelle in this case is also referred to as an associated colloid in this particular case. Let's get to the next one. Identify the orbitals which are filled in the 6th period. So they are asking which orbitals are filled in the 6th period in this particular case here. 6th period, what are going to be filled is fairly simple. We'll end up having 6s, 4f, 5d and 6p. This is a straightforward question where you will end up having anything which is going to be having same n plus L value. That is 6th period will have anything which is going to be having n plus L value being 6 getting filled up over here. Not really 6 over here, 6 over here. So n plus L value when it's going to be equal to 6, they will end up getting filled up over here. So fairly straightforward. 6 and not 6 alone, 6 and 7. Alright, so 6s is going to be the one which is going to be having n is going to be 6, L is going to be equal to 0. 4f will have 7, 5d will have 7 and 6p will also have 7. So yeah, so you'll end up having 6s is going to be 6. So 6 or 7 will get filled up over here along with the 6s in this particular case. So it will start off with 6s and it will end at 6p over here. Similarly, if I take 7th period, 7th period will have 7 and 8 as the n plus L value getting filled up. The 7 part will be only the 7s. The 8 part will be the remaining fellows. 8 part now, what is it going to be? It will effectively be the 5f, it will be the 6d and it will be 7p. Alright, so these are the 3 which will get filled up along with the 7s in this particular case here. So we're going to be having each period, you will end up having that particular rule or that particular amount getting filled up. This is basically based on your Aufbau order in general. Alright, this is based on Aufbau order over here. So let's talk about the next question over here. So this answer here has to be 6s, 4f, 5d, 6p. So 6s, 4f, 5d, 6p. So this is fine. This part over here, the 5f is wrong, 6d is wrong. This is wrong, 6d and 6f are wrong, 5f is wrong over here, 6d is wrong over here. So answer is going to be option 1 in this particular case. It's a fairly straightforward, easy question. Let's get to the next one. What is the correct electronic configuration and magnetic moment spin only of gadolinium 3+? Let's have a look now. Gadolinium 3+ is asked over here. So we have a 4f7, 4f5, 6s2. This is not going to be possible. 4f6, 6s1, not possible. 5f7. Gadolinium is only 64. It is going to be not 5f at all. So this is complete crap over here. Now, I don't know what is going to be the electronic configuration of gadolinium. Let us say that is the situation. I actually know the configuration, but let us assume you are not familiar with the electronic configuration. How do you proceed here? Look at the options and then decide. It is not that complicated. Don't assume that just because you see something new, you don't know the answer for it. Look at the options. This is a JEE Mains paper where they are giving you options. So use the options to your advantage in this case here. How do you use it to your advantage? In this case, look at the configurations given as 4f7, 4f5, 6s2, 4f6, 6s1. Now, f7 is going to be perfectly half-filled f. You know that in the D subshell, you will have chromium existing in the fashion where you're going to be having it as 4s1 and 3d5. That means you can promote electron from S into D to make it fully filled or half filled. That is going to be perfectly acceptable and allowed. When you are going to be looking at F there, having the F being half filled is even more critical, much more important compared to the chromium case where the D becomes half filled. So in this case, definitely if it can become 4f7, it will not remain as 4f6, 6s1 or 4f5, 6s2 in this particular case here. If it is going to be doing that, it is losing out in that particular case. It will not allow that kind of situation to happen. Meaning this has to be the only configuration which matches. That means the only thing which you need to check for is if the magnetic moment is going to be matching up properly. How do you check for magnetic moment? Square root of n into n plus 2. So it works out as square root of, in this particular case, 64, not 64, square root of 63. So it works out as 7 into 9. So it works out as square root of 63 here, which is going to be something slightly lesser than 8, which is of course going to be given as 7.93 Bohr magneton in this case. So if it's given as 7.93 Bohr magneton, obviously it's perfectly fine. Answer here has to be option 1. So in this case, the answer for this question is going to be option 1 here. It's fairly easy to guess. even if you do not know the electronic configuration for gadolinium. Okay, let's get to the next one. Difference in radius of the third and fourth orbit in helium plus ion is R naught of 1, and in lithium plus 2 is going to be R naught of 2. And the ratio of R naught of 1 to R naught of 2 is going to be. So difference in radius of third and fourth orbit. Third and fourth orbit. Now let's go for the radius over here. Radius of the nth shell is proportional to n squared divided by z. Alright, in terms of an exact formula, radius of the nth orbit is going to be given by 0.529 angstrom into n squared by z. So it's going to be into n squared by z over here. So they're telling you difference in radius of third and fourth orbit of helium plus. Helium plus z is going to be equal to 2. Lithium plus 2, z is going to be 3. And in this particular case here, helium is going to be z equal to 2, lithium plus 2 is z equal to 3. So we'll end up having third and fourth orbit here. N value is 3, n value is 4. So they're asking for the difference in radius over here. So let's go about it. So let's start off with the helium plus case. Helium plus case, we are going to be having it as 0.529 into, we'll have it as 4 squared by 2. 4 squared by 2 minus 0.529 multiplied by 3 squared by 2. Okay, so it's going to be 4 squared by 2 minus 3 squared by 2. So it works out as 0.529 into 4 squared is going to be 16 over here and 3 squared is going to be 9. So 16 minus 9 divided by 2. Okay, alright. So this is for the helium case. Next is going to be for the lithium plus 2 case. Lithium plus 2 is going to be having Z value as 3. So how to proceed over there? So 0.529 into, we will end up having in this case same fourth and third over here. So 4 squared by 3 minus 0.529 into 3 squared by 3. So we'll end up having in this particular case here 0.529 into 16 minus 9. Again it works out as 16 minus 9. But this time divided by 3. So we are going to be having this as the ratio or this as the difference for helium plus and this is the difference for lithium plus 2. Okay, so let's have a look at the ratio right now. So this is basically going to be your R naught of 1 in this case and this is going to be your R naught of 2 in this case. So we have R naught of 1 and R naught of 2 applicable like this. Now we are asked to find the ratio of R naught of 1 to R naught of 2. So R naught of 1 divided by R naught of 2 is asked in this case. Just substitute the values. So you're going to be having 0.529 and 0.529 eventually getting cancelled. So let's keep it anyway, it doesn't matter. Multiplied by 7 by 2 divided by, we'll have 0.529 into 7 by 3. 0.529, 0.529 go away. 7 and 7 go away. So it simply works out as 3 by 2, meaning 1.5. So it's going to be 1.5 in this particular case here. So 3 by 2, okay, they have already given 3 by 2 here. So answer is going to be 3:2 in this particular case here. So the question here is basically testing you on whether you know this formula. If you know this formula, you can solve the question. If you do not know this formula, you are going to be in trouble with respect to this question. This is a question which can appear either in your chemistry paper or in your physics paper from modern physics chapter. Here obviously it's coming from atomic structure chapter in this case. Let's get to the next one. Okay, for complete combustion of 1 mole of each of propane and butane. Propane is going to be having molecular formula as C3H8. Butane is going to be having molecular formula as C4H10. So we have C3H8 and C4H10 over here. Find the sum of minimum number of moles of oxygen required. So the C3H8 is basically going to be giving me 3 moles of carbon dioxide and it will end up giving me also 4 moles of water. Alright. Now, the C4H10 in this case will give me 4 moles of carbon dioxide and 5 moles of water in this case. So, if it's going to be giving me 3 moles of carbon dioxide and 4 moles of water, 4 moles of carbon dioxide and 5 moles of water, how many moles of oxygen are required in both cases here? That's basically what we need to calculate over here. So, we're going to be having 3 moles of O2 plus, for this I will need 3 moles of O2. For this, I will require 2 moles of oxygen in this particular case over here. So, we'll end up having 3 O2 and 2 O2 required over here. In this case, I will be requiring 4 carbon dioxide over here. So 4 O2 required over here. And over here, I will end up requiring 5 by 2 O2 over here. So I'm going to be having all of these added up, which effectively works out as 7 O2 plus 2. So it works out as plus 2, meaning 9 O2 over here. And I will end up having 2.5 O2 in this particular case over here. So it effectively works out as 11.5 moles of oxygen gas in this particular case here. So we will effectively be needing 11.5 moles of O2 gas over here. So it's fairly straightforward. It is just needing you to balance the equation properly. That's all. So we'll end up having in this case here overall 11.5 moles of oxygen is going to be required. So answer for this is going to be working out as 11.5 in this case. Let's get to the next question. Reaction A gives product, reactant B gives product, are both first order reactions. Okay. Half-life of the first reaction is 180 seconds. 180 seconds. Okay. In minutes they are asking. So let's convert this guy to minutes. So this works out as 3 minutes. So half-life of reaction 1 is going to be 3 minutes over here. That means A gives products, T half is going to be 3 minutes in this case. Okay, alright. And second reaction is going to be 300 seconds. 300 seconds now, this works out as 5 minutes. Okay, so when B is going to be giving products, the T half for this works out as 5 minutes. Okay, alright. Initially, concentration of A is equal to concentration of B. Then after how much time in minutes, concentration of B becomes 4 times the concentration of A. Fairly straightforward. You are having 4 times over here, nicely given to you. That means this has to be obviously related to a T half. Why? Because 4 is a power of 2. Whenever you end up having this as a power of 2 over here, automatically it has to be related to T half, provided your starting is going to be the same. So we don't need to even sit and substitute any equation over here. All you have to do over here is use your common sense with respect to half-life time and proceed based on that. For instance, let us say I am taking 1 mole of A. 1 mole of A after 3 minutes will end up becoming half. Then after another 3 minutes will effectively end up becoming 1/4. After another 3 minutes, it's going to become 1/8, and so on and so forth. You can keep writing and then check where the T half will match up, where the concentration of B ends up becoming the same as concentration of A. Or rather in this case, you are asking for 4 times over here. So let me write down a few more steps over here. So after another 3 minutes, we'll have it as 1/16, and after another 3 minutes, it will become 1/32. After another 3 minutes, it will end up becoming 1/64. Another 3 minutes, it will end up becoming 1/128. Okay, this is for A. Let me check out for B now. So B ke liye what is going to be happening after some time, after say 5 minutes in this case, 1 half-life, it becomes half. After another 5 minutes, it ends up becoming 1/4. After another 5 minutes, it ends up becoming 1/8 in this particular case over here. And after another 5 minutes, it ends up becoming 1/16. Now in this case, check out. What do we need over here? We need 4 times the concentration of A. So let's take after say 2 T halves. 2 T halves, unfortunately, of this will not match up with this over here properly. So the best one we can take is going to be 3 T halves. Let us check for 3 T halves. 3 T halves now, it's 5, 5, 5, 15 minutes time. So after 15 minutes, amount of B left over is going to be 1/8 times original. Amount of A left over after 15 minutes. 15 minutes now, it's going to be 1, 2, 3, 4 and 5 T halves. So after 5 T halves, amount of A left over is 1/32. So A is going to be having 5 T halves done over here, meaning amount of A left over will be 1/32 in this particular case of the original amount. As you can see, it is working out as 4 times. So in this case, concentration of B after 15 minutes works out as 4 times concentration of A after 15 minutes. So we'll end up having in this particular case here, the amount of time needed is going to be 15 minutes over here. So 15 minutes is going to be the answer in this case. So after how much time means answer is going to be 15 minutes in this case. This method works only in certain cases. The better method over here is write the equation and solve it. How do you write the equation and solve it? I'll just quickly explain to you over here. You can effectively write Bt is equal to B naught e to the power of minus Kt over there, or rather K2 into T. Similarly, we'll end up having At working out as A naught e to the power of minus K1 into T. Substitute that, this is going to be equal to that. So we'll end up having B naught e to the power of minus K2 into T is equal to A naught e to the power of minus K1 into T. They're giving you A naught equal to B naught, cancel them off. You'll effectively have this. You'll have to take logarithm over there and then solve over here. So this is the logical method to proceed, mathematically speaking. But this is going to be a more easier shortcut which will work out more easily with lesser mathematics. Of course, this doesn't work in all cases. You got to be careful about which case it is applicable for. I can recognize that it is going to be 4 times, based on my experience over here. So based on your experience, you can find shortcuts like that. But ultimately, the foolproof method which will work every time is going to be this. So if you are given this question, if you are experienced enough in this kind of model, you can use the method which I used over here to solve. Otherwise, you can use this method to proceed and solve for this question over here. Either way, the answer will still work out as the same thing. Answer is going to be 15 minutes over here. So let's get to the next thing. I believe this probably is the last question we have for today. Yes, this is the last question we have for today in this particular case here. So we will be ending the discussion over here for today. Right now, I think we have only like 14, 15, 16 questions available. I'm not sure exactly how many questions we have in this particular case here, but that's what we could collect for today's session. So that's basically what we have. We'll be coming back for a complete session over here later on once we collect the remaining questions. So till then, take care guys. Thank you very much and stay safe.